Today we're talking a bit about the idea of mastery, and this afternoon, yes, we have a workshop on that. But in the meantime, we want to cover this concept thoroughly, even just for this bit of time we do have. A lot of times I've been here and I've shared in most places I go, I talk about Christ consciousness. We hear about concepts of the divinity in us. In fact, it's what Christ is. It's the name we give God when it's in us. Christ is the name of God when in us. It's the name of our true self. It's what we were created to be. Now, we've fabricated all kinds of other names, all kinds of other identities. And when I go around to places, and I sometimes mediate meetings for churches, groups, individuals, couples, and so on and so on. When you talk to people about their issues, especially when it involves other people, it's interesting because you can easily get caught up in whatever's going on. The conversations, the issues, the troubles, the trials, and so on. Mastery, which is what we're talking about today, mastery means many things, and I'll explain some of it here. But one of the things mastery means is cutting to the chase. Masters don't mess around. Masters don't lollygag and it's like, let's get to it. Let's have the best. The best teachers, the best musicians, the best. You had a person speaking up here about service to your community. Well, of course. It shouldn't be a thing they have to ask. It should be, well, of course. Service is a hugely underestimated level of consciousness. It's one that actually brings prosperity and groundedness to our being. It brings all the lofty Om Mani Padme stuff right down to the here I am. What can I do? And masters, although the word masters know to serve. What else would we be here to do? If we are amazing, if we are Christ, what value does it have to light a candle and put it away in a cupboard? The masters choose love, but love in action. So we serve. Masters, however, know how to cut to the chase. When I talk to individuals and so forth, instead of just hearing all this stuff, I'm constantly reminded, you want to solve a lot of issues, you want to solve a lot of problems, here's one way to do it. And some people say, what is my soul's purpose? Or where should I move? Or this and that, and all the questions that befall us. First, if you don't know who you are, how can you come to any other conclusion? So everything that you do, everything that we experience, and we heard early on in the service today, the idea of how consciousness, how thoughts tend to create, right? We heard it in our morning affirmation and prayer. But who's the person praying? Because all of our thoughts are prayers, not just our words. Our thoughts are prayers. And now I'm not sitting here telling you about thought is powerful, that we know that. But your thoughts only can spring up based on your beliefs. Who you are determines what you think. What you think then will, of course, help determine what you see in your life manifest. But it all stems from who you believe you are first. So who am I? Who's the person talking today? So naturally, if I wake up, it's not that it's conscious, but if I wake up with a belief that I'm empty inside, I'm already determining what kind of person I might create as a partner. My emptiness will already determine. It's like a simple calculation. Emptiness, messed up, not knowing who I am. Send. It's the cosmic, dating service. It's not just on the internet. It's empty, unlovable, typically abandoned, and willing to take it. As long as you're there for me, as long as you're there, so I don't feel too alone. This is what we do. It's what we do with jobs. So we struggle, and the whole universe, we pray for God's will to be done. And then it starts to happen, and we say, God, I take that back. God, bring your will. Bring your prosperity and abundance. So how do you know that losing our ego form of prosperity isn't part of bringing in the greater one? So we want to remanipulate our version of the love-hate relationship with prosperity. Give it to us, but not too much, and not for too long, and not forever. We want the love-hate relationships of romance. We want a love-hate relationship with prosperity. We want the tide to come in and the tide to go out because we're used to duality. We don't want things to go too well for too long. And is that God speaking? Is that God in us? Is that the Christ? No, that's the twisted human part of our being. And it comes from the, I'm no longer part of God. Therefore, if I'm not part of God, which is an identity we now choose, what does a person have in their life when they're separate from love? Oh, probably messed up relationships. What does a person deserve in terms of prosperity if they're separate from abundance? God, abundance. Clearly, a little, smidgen of this and that, crumbs. That's all we can have. So when you see somebody standing up and singing from their soul, they're owning an abundance. And it's usually an abundance they've developed over lifetimes. But it's something that they're accessing, and I call it mastery. So some of us are masters at one particular thing or another, and ultimately, being the Christ, we can be masters of all things. You can be prosperous and beautiful and intelligent and so on and so on. Some of us barely eke out from life a skill at all, something we'd call ourselves good at. So what about good at everything? Some people are raised. These are my children. This is the cute one and this is the smart one. They can't be both. They can't be both. And that's how people are raised. You're either this or you're that. Artists typically are starving artists. There's a lot more starving artists than there are successful ones. Why? Because the art is coming from up here and the money is down here in terms of chakras. The prosperity's down here and we're way up here. It's such a strange paradox in life. Who are we? And the good news is God created us already with the ultimate identity. I mean, what else could you be but made in the image of God? So that part's already covered. But we've got to practice and consistently practice. Make it a practice to peel the layers off. How? Whenever you see the non-God opinion, it's got to go. Whenever you see an opinion of yourself being reflected that isn't God's opinion. So the lack, don't be afraid of it. If you see a little, oh wow, the checkbook. It struck a little fear for a moment. See it. Well, why not? Jesus did it. Jesus took a moment to say, in this moment, why am I afraid? It's okay, but do something about it. Masters don't mess around. They get to it. Who am I? What voice is that today? So when I mediate groups, all the conversation can go on and on and on. Humans, man, around and around and around. And usually, it can come to such closure, and usually peaceful closure, when we ask ourselves, what is it you really want here? And what you want will come from, what is it you really are? What's the core? Every board of every church, of every business, needs to know who they are. And you know what's interesting about life? Some people went to Edgar Cayce, and they said, could you help us to do an oil well? We want to strike it rich and give money to the poor, whatever. So Cayce found it, fine, okay. Go, and this guy's accurate, man. Cayce could just do anything. So Cayce goes into a trance. He finds a spot. He says, it's there. Go to this place. That's where to drill for oil. They raise the money. They start drilling. The drill bit breaks. This goes wrong. This goes wrong. That goes wrong. They go to him again. Well, what's happening? He says, the oil's there. You people are not all in congruence. Some of you want this, some of you want that. Some of you want the oil for the money for yourself, some of it want it for charity. And you know what? None of those are wrong as long as they all could agree on what it is they're there for. The point of the story and the end of the story is they never struck oil. They gave up on it, and moments later, somebody else struck oil at the spot. You know who the person was? A person that wanted nothing but money. They weren't going, oh, money pod me, God's will be done. They had one thought, ka-ching, and they got it. So we can go, God, how come the spiritual people always lose out? Because you're messed up. Get it together. Get it together. Oh, I just want to, and this is common. People will say to me, Michael, I'm going through a divorce and it's not about the money. Shut up. Don't say that too loud. I don't want anything. Stop it. You're going to a few years from now be having a session about what you don't have. It's okay to have a fair settlement. Oh, I want to be spiritual. I just want to backpack to Sedona. You will. And like a lot of people, after a few days, you'll be broke again. And then you'll have to go somewhere else. We have to get in alignment. Masters don't mess around. Who am I? What am I ultimately about? The Christ. And the Christ is just another name for a master. But we live in three worlds and don't realize it. It's just that our consciousness more identifies with one or another. There are three worlds: heaven, Eden, and earth. To live in heaven, you have to be divine and God in consciousness. To live in Eden, a master or the Christ. To live on earth, you just need to be human. Each of these is within us, but we know that our ultimate goal is the divine. And all of these are present, even Eden and heaven, they're right here. But it's a frequency you live in. It's a consciousness you live in. So a lot of us say the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak, and we live nothing but in the humanness. The master is always calling us to rise up, to get back to Eden, so that inevitably back to our divinity. But you won't just get back to the divinity. You can't just chant it or om it or wish it or whatever. We have to live it. And before you see the divinity being lived and experienced, the master has to be lived and experienced. So what does a master look like, feel like? Well, it's like living the Christ consciousness in practical ways. I'll get into this much more in the afternoon, but really, loving, love in action, like service. Masters are loving. Masters don't, here's what we think: masters are either ascended, masters are Saint Germain. It's not your next door neighbor, it's Saint Germain. Or, no, there are people that we meet. They're people that sit on stages with flowers all around them, turbans and whatever, going, "It is nice to meet you." You know? Is that a master? It may be. If they see you mowing your lawn and struggling, do they come over and help you mow your lawn? That's the kind of master I'm looking for. There's lots of people that proclaim, masters. I'm such an amazing being. You don't know how many books I've sold. I'm a quadrillionaire. And yet, you can't reach them. You can't talk to them. They don't live this in a practical kind of a sense, a practical kind of a sense or a way. An example which I've shared many times, but I'll never forget.